This video is coming out of the questions that I'm getting online from you guys. So I get asked at least several times a week about how to make music with scales and arpeggios, because it's of course easier to learn how to play an arpeggio, but it's much more difficult to really get it into your playing and to be able to incorporate it into your solos in a way that sounds like. So what I'm going to do in this video is that I'm gonna do a little bit differently. I'm gonna work with a challenge. You can score points along the way, and then I'm going to cover 7 different ways that you can actually use arpeggios, that you can make licks. So it's not really about finding the arpeggios, it's much more about how you make some solid lines with them. And you can check for yourself if you know all of them, if there's something you want to work on, or maybe you can tell me that I forgot one. My name is Jens Larsen, learn jazz, make music. I'm going to cover some melodic approaches. I'm not really focusing on which arpeggios to work with. I'm really going to focus on how you use them. And I don't have any official names for this, so you're going to have to live with whatever I made up or complain loudly in the comments. This is about knowing the arpeggio. I think this is such an essential thing to start working with. As soon as you can play an arpeggio, try to mix it with the scale that's surrounding it when you're playing over a chord. So in this case, I'm playing over an A minor 7. I'm actually just playing the A minor 7 arpeggio, but I'm adding the B in between the first 2 notes, so between the A and the C. So that's how I get. Another example where I'm adding a note between G and B in a C major 7 arpeggio could sound like this. So here I'm playing the C major 7 arpeggio in the beginning of the line, but I'm adding the A in between the G and the B. In the previous example, I was using a C major 7 arpeggio over an A minor 7 chord. And it is very practical to have several arpeggios available that you can use when you're improvising over any chord that you come across. If you want to check out how to really dig into that process and finding a lot of arpeggios, then check out this recent video that I did where I'm going over 25 arpeggios that all work really well on a D minor 7 chord. So how does this work? In general, we construct arpeggios by stacking thirds within the scale. So if we have an F major 7, and that's the 4th degree in C major, so we have this scale. And then you're constructing the arpeggio by stacking thirds from the F, so F, A, C, and E. And often you can also use the arpeggios that you find if you start shifting the root up or down a diatonic third. So in this case, if I start from the third of the F, the A, so I'm shifting up a diatonic third, then I get A, C, E, and G. And that will work as well because, as you can tell, it's pretty much the same notes as F major 7, so it's gonna sound good with the chord. And you can shift up maybe a third, sometimes a fifth, and also down a third very often. Depends a little bit on the context, whether it's gonna work and what type of chord and what notes you end up with. And this is definitely something you wanna check out for all chords that you wanna improvise over. Here's an example of how to use a D minor 7 arpeggio, so the arpeggio where you shift down a third over an F major 7. As you can see in this example, I'm using the D minor 7 arpeggio in the second half of the first bar, so this descending arpeggio. And I think in general, any chord that you want to improvise over, that you come across, you want to have at least 2 arpeggios that you can use on it, just to have some more vocabulary, some more options when you're improvising. How's it going with the score? Did you get both points until now, or did you already found something that you want to work on and that you can develop further? Now that you can find more arpeggios for each chord, then it makes sense to also really explore how you can make melodies with that. And if you try to make melodies where you're only using arpeggios and chaining them together, then you can make melodies that sound really different from scale melodies and also really give sort of a wider range to what's happening and making it a lot more dramatic. And this is something that's very common with a lot of people's playing. You can hear Kurt Rosenwinkel do this a lot, but you'll also hear it with Parker. An example of how to do this with an E minor 7 and a C major 7 arpeggio on an A minor 7 chord sounds like this. So here I'm really using the E minor arpeggio to sort of set up the C major 7 arpeggio. So I'm using the last 2 notes of the E minor as an enclosure for the C, and then continuing up further, really making a line with a large range. You can do the same in a descending version with an A minor 7 and an E minor 7 arpeggio like this. Now you have a way of finding arpeggios that work well with the chord and that are a third away from each other. And you can actually use this in two different ways to create some great lines. So in the example that I just played, I'm using the first one of those approaches, which is called Cascading Arpeggios. And what I'm doing here is that I'm simply just playing the arpeggios next to each other, and then the common tones that all work well with the chord are just tying the whole thing together and creating this waterfall of notes that just sound good, and in that way creating a strong line. So I'm doing this on a D7. The first arpeggio is the arpeggio from the third, so that's an F sharp half diminished. Then we get the arpeggio from the chord itself, D7. Then the arpeggio that's found a third under the D7, that's a B minor 7. And then I'm just finishing it off with a sort of bluesy line. And if you can find several arpeggios that work well with the chord, then this way of making lines is really simple, but also a really powerful way of just creating a different sounding melody. And the next thing we're going to work with is how to use passing chords in between the arpeggios that we already found. The other way that you can take advantage of having arpeggios that are a third apart is by adding the arpeggio that's in between. So you have sort of stepwise motion and you're kind of adding an extra chord, but really it's just sort of a short passing chord, and that works really well to just create some movement within the line. That's what I'm doing in this example. So it's on an A minor 7 chord, and I'm using first the A minor 7 arpeggio, and then later the arpeggio from the third, which is of course a C major 7 arpeggio. And then in between, I'm adding the B minor 7 arpeggio. So the first part is just the A minor 7 arpeggio, then the B minor 7 arpeggio, and then moving up to the C major 7. So how's the score going? Did you get all 5 points until now? Or is there something that you definitely want to check out and add to your vocabulary? This is an old technique coming out of classical music, but it's certainly also a part of jazz, and it's especially connected with bebop, I think. A simple version of this, if you apply it to an arpeggio, so if I have a C major 7 arpeggio like this, then it's called octave displacement. So I'm taking the first note, the C, and then I'm moving that up an octave. And then for the rest, I'm playing the same note, so instead of playing, I'm playing. And of course, that's creating a melody that's skipping around more, also changing direction, and that makes it more interesting and more surprising. And that's really the effect that we want to have, that we're going for with this. And you will probably also recognize that this is really the beginning of the example that I played. So on the A minor 7, the first part is really just this C major 7 arpeggio. And then it's continuing in a 2-5-1 lick. You can do the same with an A minor 7 arpeggio like this. Here I'm using the octave displacement version of the A minor 7 to help me transition from A minor 7 to D7. And that's simply just because the way that this is laid out, it's just naturally going to target that F sharp. So it's really going to tell me now I'm on the D7. So that's also where I'm placing it at the end of the first bar. This approach to using arpeggios is really about harmonizing a very simple top note melody and then add, in this case, descending arpeggios as a way of just giving away the harmony and considering those sort of separate voices. So it's really almost a polyphonic example. And this works the best if you demonstrate it on a moving progression like this. So really what's happening here is that I'm just harmonizing this melody on each of the chords. So we have the B on the A minor, the B flat on the D7 altered, and then the A on the G major 7. And then I'm just putting chords under it that I'm then playing as arpeggios. So if I was to play the same thing with chord voicings, then it would be this. I think this is a really great, but also a very different way to come up with some really great sounding lines. So what you have here is just a very simple stepwise melody, but then you have this trail of color and harmony and sort of that's just moving underneath it and not really a part of it, but just making the melody more interesting to listen to. And you get some really different sounding lines like this, so that's well worth checking out. So how many points did you get? Leave a comment on this video, and of course if there's one specific topic or one of these variations that you think this is something I really want to dig into, then let me know about that as well. Maybe especially if it's something you would like to see a video on, because of course suggestions for videos are always welcome. If you want to dig into, because now you're working with improvising with arpeggios, And it makes sense that you also want to have a lot of options for the different arpeggios that you can work with. Maybe check out this video where I'm going over 25 different arpeggios that all work well on a D-7, because that's going to teach you how to find arpeggios, which is really important, and of course also how to use them when you're improvising.